District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program.
This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use, but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year and plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
Welcome to District of Conservation. I am your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. It might be Memorial Day, but there is no rest here on the podcast. I had my fun on Memorial Day weekend already, and we're expecting inclement weather, so I figured why not throw up a new podcast on some timely matters and also include an interview with frequent guest of the show, Travis Thompson, because I think it's important to keep things current and not neglect content, because I really want you all to hear my commentary on this National Park Service, Denali National Park and Preserve story, and also to hear from Travis Thompson on the latest with the Yes on 2 Florida ballot initiative to get the Right to Hunt and Fish Amendment on the ballot and eventually passed with a 60+% vote majority in the Sunshine State this fall. I was able to do a Potomac River cruise, seeing a lot of National Park Service sites, because if you don't know, most of the memorials that you see here in Washington, D.C. area, or kind of the trails and walking paths leading up to D.C. in Northern Virginia, they're all governed, if you didn't know, by the National Park Service. GW Parkway, where I frequently drive, it's one of my go-to places for exploring, driving, whatever, governed by the National Park Service. Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln memorials, all governed by NPS. I've long advocated for and said here on the podcast that I like national parks. I'm a public lands fan, whether it's out west or here on the eastern United States. I grew up in California, so of course I have an appreciation for NPS lands and whatnot. What I don't like is seeing the NPS, much like Department of Interior, falling away from its mission statement. So when I saw this story out of Denali National Park and Preserve in Alaska, of course I wanted to jump in. To me, it seems like a verifiable story. I don't think a government contractor who reportedly told one Alaska blog called the Alaska Watchman that they, as federal highway workers, were ordered by Superintendent Brooke Merrill to remove a 3-foot by 5-foot flag from construction cranes. And reportedly, what this blog had said, and I believe it was confirmed by Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska, the junior senator of Alaska, there have been numerous reportings of Superintendent Brooke Merrill, who became superintendent 2 years ago, give or take, that she had complained and directly said, according to these contractors working on the federal highway project, that draping the flag, even though American flags are longtime fixtures on NPS lands and national parks and related parks under the purview of the National Park Service, that them having a flag on their crane or on their truck does not fit in with the park experience. So when I saw this story, it was a very popular Twitter account. And I know some people listening might be like, oh my gosh, Gabriella's channeling her inner conservative and she's, jumping on this story, dogpiling on this story, and is viscerally opposing the Biden administration. You may think that, but I'm someone, like I said just moments ago, that I care deeply about the National Park Service. And when you see something like this, yes, it may be an extension of the culture war. Yes, it may be a piling on the Biden administration, however you take it. But we have chronicled here on the podcast since Biden's gotten to office that the various different agencies and sub-agencies of Department of Interior, including Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, including people like the superintendent, they are strategically and specifically selected, not because they necessarily have the qualifications, but I think because they check off certain historic markers. So this Merrill character was touted in a press release 2 years ago when she was elevated to superintendent that she was the first woman to ever supervise Denali National Park. That's fine and dandy. I support women's empowerment, but to me, they were emphasizing her selection as a woman versus what she brings to the table. And today at townhall.com, when I was assessing what the heck she brings to the table, I have found that she doesn't really bring much to the table, unfortunately, in terms of her views and philosophy with respect to what the National Park Service should prioritize, what their mission statement should be, including Denali. And I dug at townhall.com and explained at townhall.com today that her thinking, to me, just seems so diametrically opposed to what the National Park Service mission and the greater Department of Interior mission should be. It should be to allow for public lands access, to support conservation, to allow people to enjoy and recreate outdoors. But what I found digging into Merrill's background and some of her past statements, for her, it's not about that. And that's why her reportedly and allegedly calling these displaying of flags offensive fits in line with her thinking and just where this Department of Interior is sadly going and why I think it's going in a bad direction. So I found in the Anchorage Daily News right after she was elevated to this position. So supervisors, to my knowledge, don't have to go through congressional confirmation. That's usually the secretaries and deputies who typically have to do this. But she was elevated to this position summer of 2022. And I found that, of course, naturally speaking, if she's offended by the American flag, she has to support, these kind of detracting causes, political causes that really should have no bearing to NPS, DOI, etc. So she supports diversity, equity, and inclusion and agrees with a climate crisis narrative. What she says of DEI, I just think looking at what we've been able to accomplish with effort in terms of seeing an equitable number of women in leadership roles, we know we can achieve the same results with other areas of diversity and inclusion in the National Park Service. And when she was probed about climate change, the questioner asked her, climate change is impacting Alaska in so many different ways. I'm wondering what more specific climate change impacts you're seeing play out in Denali and what your plans are for some of those more specifically. She says, we're seeing what everyone in Alaska is seeing, that the permafrost melt and increased temperatures and increased rainfall are creating a lot of movement in the ground. And so we've got sinkholes and landslides at an increasing rate. Some of the foundations of buildings are starting to move. And so a lot of it is going to be just adjusting how we build, how we improve our infrastructure, the methods that we use for a foundation of a building or where we decide to do site buildings. Another aspect, here's the kicker, is that it's going to be more expensive to respond to these more catastrophic climate change movements on the ground. And we're going to have to figure out how we do that and how and whether we can maintain all of our facilities in the park. Entities like DOI, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service should be governed by science, not politics. That's what I've long believed. And under the Biden administration, they are straying away from this with climate alarmism, this push for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the great outdoors already naturally facilitates that. It's supposed to be open for everyone. Nobody should be excluded from the outdoors. I don't think you need a philosophy or an action plan like this to make the outdoors more welcoming, because when you do that, you actually decrease opportunities for people. You limit the amount of stakeholders who can chime in on different decisions, openings, adjustments to different management plans, what have you. And so I really hate that this proto-Marxist stuff has creeped into something as pure and unadulterated as the national park system, our public lands. Everything has to be governed by science here. I don't want to have this political science inserted into my experience in the national park. So that's why I'm really animated about this issue. And where's this all stemming from? Why are we having historic picks who are deviating from the mission statement? And it all goes back to President Biden's day one executive orders to, again, push radical ideas and individuals who corrupt the national park system, DOI, et cetera, et cetera. Some more background on this story. So this Alaska blog that broke the story reported this on May 22nd. Senator Dan Sullivan chimed in and tweeted the following. It is an outrage that on the lead up to Memorial Day, a construction worker was prohibited from flying an American flag in a national park in Alaska. I cannot conceive of a federal law or regulation mandating this. I've written the National Park Service and demanded a response. According to the original reporting, they never got a response from NPS. The NPS refused to give a statement. And to me, it seems like they're guilty, or maybe admitting some semblance of guilt here, because they issued a statement and seem to be in the denial phase. They write in a statement issued yesterday, May 26th, reports that a National Park Service official ordered the removal of an American flag from a Denali Bridge construction worker's vehicle at Denali National Park are false. At no time did an NPS official seek to ban the American flag from a project site or associated vehicles. The NPS neither administers the bridge project contract nor has it the authority to enforce terms or policies related to the contract or contractors performing the work. The American flag can be seen at various locations within Denali National Park, at park facilities and campsites, on public and private vehicles, and at employee residence, and we welcome its display on this Memorial Day weekend and every day. Sounds like they're doing a little bit of damage control, right? Why would a federal contractor lie about this? I don't think someone would intentionally try to mislead on such a story, and knowing just where the direction of this DOI, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, is going, I am led to believe that this would definitely occur. I mean, you look at the different closures, the different controversies, just the different developments that have happened, just their prioritization of political causes over wildlife management, wildlife science. It leads me to believe that there is probably some merit to this accusation, or that this incident did happen and Superintendent Merrill did likely order the removal of this flag. I don't think Senator Sullivan would make this up. I don't think the guy who reported this would damage his credibility just to get clickbait. There are dishonest journalists, let me tell you. But I really think this is a pretty sincere story. And if this somehow turns out to be gunk, we'll refute the story later on. But right now, it seems to me that the Denali National Park and Preserve is on defense mode. They're admitting some sort of culpability here. But as I mentioned, the Department of Interior has been hijacked in terms of its thinking that they're now prioritizing all these different extraneous causes, deviating away from wildlife management, hunting, true conservation. You've heard me talk about this all the time because they have accorded themselves with an all-of-government approach under a equity action plan. They've followed the day one climate crisis executive order as well to put climate change above everything else. So naturally, they're going to put DEI above everything else. So when you have these people there who are politically selected to advance a mission, to appear that they're conservationists, but they're not, I'm not surprised to see controversies like this emerge. Bureau of Land Management put out a blueprint for DEI, essentially. Department of Interior, under the Fish and Wildlife Service, was hosting, reportedly, and in a well-documented way, eco-grief sessions over wildlife and biodiversity. There have been so many missteps and so many actions that are just reprehensible from this administration, and it's disappointing because we don't have serious people in charge, and it's affecting wildlife management decisions, your ability to hunt. In Alaska, we always talk about the 60 million acres have been closed off to caribou hunting under this Alaska Federal Subsistence Board at the direction of Deb Haaland. You have lead phase-outs. You have this fish and wildlife BIDA rule that puts climate change above wildlife management. So I am not surprised to see hand-selected people who accord themselves with this narrative undermining something as simple as brandishing an American flag. You go to any National Park Service land, you see the American flag wave. And if they took an issue and say it doesn't fit into the park experience, I'm going to believe the superintendent if she allegedly said that because of just how these people think and operate. So I wouldn't put it past them to get offended by an American flag and now do this damage control and say, well, we actually like and wear the flag in our properties. And yeah, there is one at the main visitor center in Denali National Park. I wasn't able to go when I was in Alaska because it was a little bit far from where I was stationed when I was filming out that way. So I would have loved to have seen it for myself. Nevertheless, we will keep you updated on this story. Again, if I have to make a retraction, if this turns out to be bunk, I will let you know because we want to be honest here. But to me, it seems like this is really credible and that the Park Service is doing damage control. So very disappointing. NPS is usually one of the least controversial government agencies and most well-liked ones. It usually gets high approval ratings. I know that's very odd to say about a government agency, but for the most part, they aren't really encumbered by these controversies. But under this administration, I've seen too many. I've seen dozens of different incidences, whether it's, changing their mission statement, working to create more national monuments without proper consultation, instituting timed entry fees, which don't really do much to crowd control, but they really limit access and such. So I'm just disappointed, and I wouldn't put past Denali National Park and the superintendent to be angry over an American flag. So American flags do fit into the national park experience. And now let's hear from our friend Travis Thompson on what the latest happenings of the Yes on to Florida ballot initiative for the right to hunt and fish are from him directly. Enjoy. We have a special update on Florida's right to hunt and fish amendment and some other things that are happening in the Everglades National Park and region, and also kind of a update on the Big Cypress National Preserve with our friend Travis Thompson. Travis, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back, Gabby. Always glad to be on District of Conservation.
It feels like we weren't chatting too long ago, but I know weeks turn into months, months turn into lots of months. And you guys have been really upping the ante with efforts to support Yes on 2 in Florida. I think your state is one of the few, if not the few, I think the only one that was able to get a ballot from the legislature passed to go onto the ballot. Other states haven't been successful. There have been efforts in West Virginia. I think there was some stuff introduced in Missouri, South Dakota, and a few other places, but all eyes are on Florida amidst all the other, bad ballot initiatives to restrict hunting and management in states like Colorado. The one glimmer of hope, I would say, is Florida. So what is the latest in the efforts to get this right to hunt and fish amendment passed from your vantage point?
I'm so happy we're doing this right now because, at the time of this recording, it's only been a couple days, but there's a website now for the campaign that is yes on the number 2 Florida.com that's been stood up. And to recap for a lot of people, and we've talked about this a little bit before, and you had Luke Hilgeman from IOTR, International Order of T. Roosevelt kind of helped us get this ballot initiative through, and it's going to be on the ballot in Florida in November. So really that's going to kind of be like September because of mail-in ballots. And so we're just trying to talk to as many people about it as we can to increase awareness about it. You want to learn more about it, though, you can go to yeson2florida.com, and I forget the social media handles because they had to be a little bit different because they were already taken in some cases. But the Twitter is yeson2florida, which is the same as the website, and the Instagram is vote yes on 2 Florida. But we've got this ballot initiative, and we're trying to get everyone talking about it. You and I've talked before. For us in Florida, we often see the same threats that you talk about in Oregon, Colorado, some of those other states, but they're maybe not as overt. They're more like slices here and there. And I always call it like the death by 1,000 cuts. We don't see someone that wants to come in and close deer hunting. We see someone that wants to come in and take it away in this smaller area, but you combine 3 to 7 to 10 of those areas, and now it becomes a magnitude, and you do that year over year, and it becomes a problem. It's the same with fishing, right? How often in the last year have you talked about lead bans in national wildlife refuges? And there's lots of stuff out there that are maybe that's not significant to some people, but it's these cuts that come at us constantly. And if we're not careful, we're going to wake up one day and it's like, where do we hunt? Where do we fish? When can we hunt? When can we fish? To add on to, we've talked about before, the conservation benefits of it. Hunting and fishing is the most humane means to managing animals, managing wildlife. And the land that it's required is always great land for other species. In Florida, we care deeply about endangered species and threatened species and iconic species. Those all exist on the same land that your white-tailed deer and your turkeys and your quail and stuff exist on. And similarly, your clean water that you need to fish in is where you're going to find your manatees and your dolphins and your coral reefs and everything else. So these are really important. I tell people all the time, this is a conservation amendment.
That's a good way to describe it, because we've seen kind of the dismissiveness of opponents who've said that the efforts that you all are trying to push and get through the yes vote, it will infringe on property rights. It'll cause biodiversity loss and chaos. And I'm here to reassure everyone listening and those in Florida that, having lived in a right to hunt and fish state for the better part of 12 years, give or take, I have not seen any of that materialize in my state. And I think we've had ours I think it was enacted before I moved here. I think maybe 2010 or sometime in the 2000s. But a lot of these efforts have been implemented in the 2000s. Virginia's, I know we've had ours for at least a decade since I've lived here. And I have not seen any biodiversity loss. I've seen the opposite. We have not seen people become lenient when it comes to wildlife crimes. We had the big deer, the big cemetery deer that was poached. We had universal condemnation, and it was the swiftest investigation and prosecution of a poacher I think I've ever seen because of the social media attention that was awarded to it. So you don't see wildlife laws disregarded. You don't see disregard of private property. You have bad actors who try to violate and trample on property rights when it comes to more kind of controversial forms like dog hunting. That's a whole nother animal, and I've had some guests on to talk about that. But that's not because most hunters are engaging it. You just have people who are very weird and just want to do it because they think they're above the law. This is going to happen regardless if you're in a right to hunt fish state or not. But I think what people forget looking into this is that you're not going to see a crisis. So Florida doing this is not going to imperil your wildlife whatsoever. It's not going to lead to a biodiversity crisis. It's not going to lead to more poaching. And I think a lot of the states that have these protections, they do probably see fewer poaching because, again, it's not attacking the laws. It's not making things less prosecutable. It's just showing that, in the event that, let's say in the future, a legislature were to become anti-hunting, anti-fishing, you'd have these protections in place so that they can't unravel that.
I say to people all the time, do you wait until, because I've had people say to me, well, do you think that's necessary in Florida? Like, we've got this governor and legislature and everyone that cares deeply about our environment and natural resources. And my response is, you don't wait till someone breaks in to put a lock on your door or to start using your door locks, right? Like the time to pass an amendment like this is not when we're down to 500 hunters and you know what I mean? Like when it's decline, and all these little cuts happen on the edges. The time to lock your door is before you get the break in. So I tend to say like we should be proactive about this, and that's exactly what this is. This is protecting conservation for hopefully ever in my state, or making it very, very difficult to undo. Like you said, if we had a flip in sentiment in the House, in the Senate, in the state legislature, in the governorship, if that were to happen eventually, hunting and fishing is protected. And I don't want to sound partisan there. Like, regardless of who it is, 25, 30, 50 years from now, we don't know what the societal acceptance of hunting and fishing is, right? Like, we know the society changes all the time. I want to make sure this is protected forever. And this is the time and the way to go about doing it. So critical to us to get this done, and to have as many people out there, even if you don't hunt and fish, we tell people all the time, this is a huge moment from a conservation standpoint, just for our state.
It really is. And, we have seen a lot of attacks. You and I have talked about this on many occasions. We've had lots of private conversations with others. And while we do see, I would say, more overt attacks come from the left, I'm worried that we're seeing groups like Humane Society starting to influence people on the right. I have noticed that, actually, where they've gotten a little cozy with some of these Humane Society, HSUS type animal rights advocate groups. So what is to say within a 10 to 15 year time frame, Republicans start to get captured by these interests too? Who is to say they won't? Anything can happen. So it is important, even in Republican states, presumably Republican states like Florida, where this happens, because hunting can be attacked by either side. We've seen evidence of both. It may seem right now that it is coming more so from the federal side under the Biden administration, but it could be a state, or individual Republicans. We've seen it with the Return Act. So we can't expect, a group that we nominally think to support hunting and fishing to always be at our behest. Because like I said, Humane Society is working very hard to be bipartisan, to get more influence, and even appeal to the senses of Republicans. So it's happening. It could happen in the future.
Well, and that's why I say we put the lock on the door now. Like, let's get this done. Let's get it over the finish line, and then we know we don't have to worry about it forever. And hopefully nothing changes in Florida, and we're able to continue to hunt, fish, be the free state of Florida, low state income tax, great economy, all the stuff that we love, that hopefully all that continues in perpetuity as well. Like, we always want to survive and thrive, but I definitely want to have wild places and wild things to go chase. That's exceedingly important to like my family, my history here. So I want to make sure that's protected forever.
I think people going into Florida, whether they move there or visit, I believe the big draw is going to the ocean or seeing the Everglades. It's not just Disney, which we've laughed about before and joked about before, because when I go to Florida, my goal is to at least get some beach time, or if I have a work trip, and I can't be by the beach, do something naturey or at least explore my surroundings. But when I think of Florida first, I think of the wild spaces, especially with even against kind of the contrast with the development you guys have had. I know we've talked about this before whenever you've come on the show, but amazingly, I know it's very nerve-wracking and kind of stressful to have to deal with like a lot of overdevelopment. And I do think Florida has gotten to the point where it's too saturated with buildings. And there has to be a desire to want to keep the wild spaces truly wild so people can access it and enjoy and appreciate what they have before it becomes like a concrete jungle like New York City. You don't ever want that to happen in a place like Florida or any state for that matter. And so I think that's why you guys are so adamant about having such a measure become codified into your state law. And it's not just you, Travis, or your organization, All Florida. I have seen a meeting of the minds of a lot of different groups that sometimes may not all work together. So you have, the fishing groups, you have the hunting groups, you have the duck groups, you have the Airboat Association, Guides, NSSF, Isaac Walton League, IOTR, you have BHA, you have a lot of different groups that sometimes may be on opposite ends of certain decisions, but they've all come together to support Yes On too.
Yeah, and all of those groups have supported it, the right way, because most of those groups are C3s. They've done it, they can't come out and say outright vote yes on this thing, but they've done, we want to support this legislation as it goes through, or they've written a letter or whatever. But it's really encouraging because you're seeing a wide swath of groups that, like you mentioned, they're not always on the same side. And in this case, they are coming together. And we're even starting to see people, I'll say across the aisle. I don't know that necessarily it's a partisan spanning of the aisle, but people from different kind of views of the hunting and fishing space start to kind of cling on to the importance of hunting and fishing. You mentioned development. No one in Florida likes to say that we're anti-development because we all make a living here. Like down to, I'm not just talking about people in construction, but like if you have a doctor's office or a eye clinic or a small mom and pop shop, like more people there means more foot traffic, means more revenue for you. That's good. Like that's kind of the American dream, and we all want to embrace that. We want good growth. We don't want just unfeathered, unmanaged growth. So there's times when it feels like we're holding on with both hands. But I also think we get it right a lot, and this amendment, the right to fish and hunt, just helps protect some of those things that are going to matter to us long term. And you mentioned earlier, I want to go back. You mentioned earlier, it doesn't preclude trespassing, or did I say that right? It does. Mm-hmm. It doesn't allow trespassing. Like this trespassing is already protected in Florida, so we didn't have to call it out specifically in this amendment because then it became redundant. It does not affect FWC's purview on rulemaking. So if FWC determined there's too many snook being taken, or there's too many turkeys being taken, or you shouldn't be able to use a 308 to shoot for whatever reason, they have the ability to still work within their purview and regulate that. And it doesn't undo one thing we hear over and over again, and it's so wrong, is it doesn't undo the net ban. And the way it's been explained to me, non-lawyer, is that when you interpret a state constitution, you read the whole thing every time. And what that means is if we wanted it to undo the net ban, we should have expressly called out that it undid the net ban. We did not do that. And by not doing that, it ensures that the net ban stays safe. So we prohibit gill nets and we have the right to fish and hunt. Those two things they don't negate each other. They both stand kind of in sequence with each other. So really important. It's a big deal, man. I can't stress enough. And we're trying to get people to tell people about it. Like that's really my goal, is I want everyone in Florida to be aware that this is coming, so they don't show up when they get their mail-in ballot, or they show up on November 5th and they're like, oh, what is this about? I haven't heard anything about this. We want people talking about it and encouraging everyone they know to show up for this thing.
It's also something to not be afraid of, because 23 states already have this. It's not some obscure, random, extreme measure. If 23 states have adopted it in some form or fashion, what's to say that Florida shouldn't adopt it either? Because it's almost half the country,
Well,
23 of 50.
I think I remember Luke talking with you, like they've got goals to go, I think 35 states in
Yeah.
total. They think it's attainable soon. And I know those guys are pretty dogged workers at this, and I know they're not going to be done when they're at 35. They're going to keep trying to work to see where they can get to because it's important. I mean, it really is. We say all the time, let's boil it down to this simple. We say all the time, you go and talk on schools that conservation is conservative, and we talk about conservation. And what's the name of your podcast? District of Conservation. Like, we want to be conservationists, and this is a conservation. I tell people all the time, it's the most important conservation probably opportunity we will see to vote on in my lifetime in the state of Florida.
Florida is amazing, and people go there because it's the sporting capital. I don't know about sporting capital of the US, but sport fishing capital for sure. You guys have great hunting as well. And why I don't think people just go there to go to buildings or go to Disney. That's just always been my thinking of it. And that's why this initiative has been important to me, even as a non-Floridian, because I want to see you guys have the same protections we have in Virginia and the 22 other states that also have decided to codify this too. And briefly, while we still have you, Travis, there's also a couple other things that I think listeners should be aware of. So we have seen a lot of conservation, I would say closures to hunting and fishing all over the United States, especially out west. But you guys have been on the receiving end of it through like little innocuous things. We've talked to Mike about what's happening in Big Cypress, and they unfortunately are going through with the wilderness designation for a good chunk of that, unfortunately, despite all the stakeholder input against it. You said there's also a fee they're going to be slapping on to people who use the Everglades or go to the Everglades too.
Yeah, well, and I want to go back, and you should get Mike on because I don't want to speak for the Gladesmen. Those guys are special, and Mike Elfenbein is special. If you're not following him on social media stuff, but Mike is at the time we're recording this just getting back from DC, and I know that I believe it was Congressman Franklin filed HR 8206 to basically forbid Big Cypress from ever being able to have the wilderness designation. And I want to say that bill has bipartisan support from the Florida delegation in DC. So really happy to see that. I know Mike has worked so hard. His team has worked so hard on that. Forgive me for stealing their thunder. I just happen to be here. You should really have Mike on to talk about it because it's an incredible deal, an incredible amount of work. But yeah, something else we've seen down there is recently, again, death by 1,000 cuts. And this was brought to my attention by Representative Mello, who helped us do the right to hunt and fish legislation. We're seeing in Big Cypress or in Everglades National Park, there's a usage fee for a concessionaire. So if you're a fishing guide and you want to go out of the park, and we're talking about being in the ocean, like in the estuaries and stuff, you have to pay $850 a year. That's like your usage fee. And as sportsmen, we've always been okay with paying usage fees. Like that's kind of the idea of a user pays public benefits. But recently, the National Park Service said that they want to raise that usage fee to be 3% of your annual revenue or annual income. And so this could be a substantial change that's like punitive to many of these operators down there. And again, it's a type of thing where we've seen this administration kind of go after some folks that are these aren't people getting rich. These are guys running inshore fishing charters, like one boat, and they're going out and trying to take somebody to catch a snook or redfish or tarpon or whatever. And so again, it's another fight that we've got going on. It's the death by 1,000 cuts that I mentioned earlier.
It really is true. And it may not seem overt, these prohibitions, but they are impacting people slowly but surely. And we're seeing this out west. A lot of people are going to lose access in a big chunk of Utah where Bears is going if they get their preferred alternative plan. No recreational shooting, some forms of hunting will be prohibited, no grazing, no et cetera. And now we're seeing that in Florida take shape too. And who's to say they're going to stop in Florida or Utah? I feel like they could take this to other public lands, which are so scarce, and say to people, which they've already done, as you mentioned earlier, banning lead, tackle, and prohibition in 2 of 8 national wildlife refuges that are in my area. One in Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge in Maryland's Eastern Shore, and then close to that in Chincoteague, which is where the wild ponies are. So it is coming slowly but surely, as you said, in death by 1,000 cuts. But Travis, if people want to support the Yes on 2 effort, learn more about what you do individually with All Florida, where would you like to send people to?
Yeah, so for what we do with All Florida, like we do advocacy for all things conservation. We say authentic conservation because we work on obviously land, water, but we also work on wildlife. We've even worked on endangered species. You mentioned our snail kite thing when we were offline earlier. If you've not following allfla.org, you can go. We've got a pinned video that's really cool of some snail kite work we did with our friend Matt Pierce and through a hunting operation working on an endangered species. Really cool stuff. And you can find us there, allfla.org. You can find me at Travis Thompson all over the place. And then if you want to learn more about the voting on Yes on 2, you could go to yesonToFlorida.com, and the social medias and all that stuff is there. Anyway, it's a great time to be in Florida because there's so much happening, but it's also like your head's on a swivel because you don't know which way you're going, which way stuff's coming.
That's right. Yes. And we'll include every appropriate link, social media links to the effort. I'll include your individual social media accounts too, Travis. It's always good to revisit with you, and I'm excited that we're going to get to catch up properly and sufficiently at ICAST because I've made sure to have ample time there, and we'll chat more about this in video form and get everyone, I think, excited about all things Florida and for the trade show. It's an amazing trade show. I'm so glad to be coming back after a 6-year hiatus. So I can't wait till we all get to hang out there and create some fun content and memories there.
Madison's going to come too, right? I think we're going to have.
I think she is.
A district of conservation reunion at ICAST this year.
A conservation nation, yes, everything.
I know the Yes on 2 folks will be there.
Excellent.
I think they're gonna be roaming around there. I'm hopeful IOTR is going to be there. I know they're going to have Kenya's going to be there. So lots of folks who have been on Conservation Nation, District of Conservation over the years, going to be in the room.
Yeah.
So, I'll be at the All Florida booth some, but I'll also be walking the floor working some other stuff. And really excited to see everybody. And it's great to see so many people involved in efforts like this from around the country, but also around the state. And it's ICAST is great because it's like a big reunion.
All these trade shows are. And we're so glad to have you, Travis. And stay good, stay busy, and I hope you guys will be successful. We'll probably have another update closer to the ballot initiative going before the vote, but always appreciate you coming on, my friend, and we will talk soon at ICAST.
Thanks, Gabby.
Thanks for listening to District of Conservation. If you enjoyed what you heard today, go leave us some reviews on Apple and Spotify or wherever podcasts are played. Your feedback will help us reach more people, and I love to know what is on your mind after each episode. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat or a guest announcement, because that is our way of updating all of you listeners, and we have just hit 1,000 followers on Instagram for the podcast account. Thank you very much. And if you have any guest suggestions or topics you want to hear on the show, I am all ears. I would love to hear your feedback there. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.